They told us the chains were only symbolic, a reminder of the crimes that had delivered us into the jaws of the Imperium's most disposable war machine. But the truth is that the chains never left, no matter how deep into the battlefield we marched. They tightened with every order barked through a vox grill, every explosive collar fitted snugly against a trembling throat, every moment the commissar's shadow cut across the mud like a blade searching for a neck to claim. I learned quickly that a Penal Legion soldier does not live day to day, or even hour to hour. We live from heartbeat to heartbeat, praying that the next one will not be our last. And somewhere between the screaming artillery and the frozen nights spent staring at stars we would never live to reach, a question took root in my mind so quietly that even the Emperor's light could not burn it away. How does a man condemned to die learn to carry the weight of surviving? If this story finds you drifting through the endless noise of the noosphere, stay with me a little longer. Share these words with those who walk the edge between duty and oblivion, and lend strength to this transmission by subscribing. Because voices like ours, fragile as they are, vanish quickly in a galaxy that rarely remembers the fallen. They say you never forget the moment the collar locks around your neck, not because of the weight of it, but because it replaces the sound of your own pulse. Mine clicked shut with the finality of a coffin lid, the cold metal biting into my skin like a second spine curling around the base of my throat. For a breathless moment, I thought I could hear the faint scrape of gears shifting inside it, aligning, priming, waiting. The tech priest who installed it didn't bother wiping the grease from his mechadendrites as he pulled back. He simply muttered a blessing to the Omnissiah and gestured toward the processing line with a dismissive flick of metal fingers. To him, to the administratum scribes, to the commissars watching like vultures from raised platforms, we weren't men, not even numbers. We were charges in a living minefield. We were a walking sentence designed to expire on command. The mud swallowed my boots as soon as I stepped from the holding transport into the open trench network. It clung not like earth, but like something alive, thick and clotted with promethium ash from a nearby crater field. Each step produced a sucking sound, as though the ground itself resented being disturbed and wished to pull me under. The air smelled of scorched ozone and wet rust, with hints of cordite drifting lazily in the breeze. Somewhere beyond the nearest ridge, I heard the rhythmic pound of artillery, so distant that it should have sounded harmless, yet it vibrated through the trench walls with a dull insistence that made the collar tremble against my skin. The Penal Legion reception officer, a gaunt man whose uniform looked 2 sizes too large on his skeletal frame, glared at us as though we had personally insulted his lineage. "Move," he barked through a vox grill that distorted the word into a metallic snarl. "You walk slow, you die fast. Plenty have proven that." He gestured us forward, and we shuffled along the trench like a disjointed procession of ghosts. Chains rattled, boots squelched, and the man ahead of me whispered something under his breath, though I couldn't hear the words over the roar of distant engines. They assigned me to Squad Cinder, a name so bleakly poetic I suspected some bureaucrat had chosen it as a joke. Our squad leader, an older convict named Merrick, greeted me with a stare that felt simultaneously appraising and exhausted. His explosive collar bore tiny etch marks along its rim. Tally marks, I realized, one for every campaign he had survived. The sight chilled me more than the cold rain that began to drizzle down from a gray, swollen sky. Surviving this life long enough to record its passing felt like a cruel reward. "Stand straight," Marek said, though his voice carried no authority beyond habit. "If the commissar sees you slouch, he'll put a round through your skull just to keep morale from sagging." He spoke quietly, But his words reverberated through the shallow trench as though the mud itself listened with rapt attention. "There's no mercy here, fresh blood. Only orders. You follow them, or the collar does its job for you." I nodded, tightening my grip on the lasgun that had been thrust into my hands moments earlier. It felt unfamiliar, heavier than I expected. Not because of its mass, but because of what it represented. A condemned man with a weapon is not empowered. He's simply stripped of excuses. We marched along the trench line toward the muster point. The sky darkened further, clouds converging into a churning mass overhead. Lightning forked across the horizon, illuminating a landscape that looked like a battlefield even before war touched it. Jagged remains of ruined hab blocks protruded from the soil like broken ribs. Rivers of mud wound between trenches, reflecting the sky's bruised colors with a sickly sheen. And everywhere, the emblem of the Imperial Aquila gazed down from battered banners, its two heads watching impassively as the condemned shuffled beneath. As we reached the muster point, a commissar stepped forward. His coat billowed behind him with a theatrical flourish, though the wind did not seem strong enough to justify it. His eyes were the cold, steady sort that measured every soul before him and found them already guilty. A bolt pistol hung at his hip, gleaming under a thin layer of grime. The weapon felt like a promise. "Listen well," he said, his voice crisp despite the vox distortion. "You stand here because you were found lacking. Your crimes have stripped you of rights, of rank, of dignity. But the Emperor, blessed be his eternal vigilance, affords even the damned a chance to serve." He paused, scanning our faces as if searching for defiance. "You will fight. You will obey. You will die if you falter. Redemption is not guaranteed. Survival is not expected. But your sacrifice may spare worthy souls from your fate. Consider that an honor you do not deserve, but one you will fulfill regardless." Merrick murmured beneath his breath, too quietly for anyone but me to hear. "Consider that a warning." A tech priest advanced with a servo skull trailing behind him. The skull's mechanical tendrils writhed as it scanned each collar, its optical lens glowing a baleful red. When it hovered before me, I felt the collar tighten momentarily, as if testing my pulse. A faint, prickling sensation radiated along my spine. The skull emitted a soft chime before drifting away. My collar had been acknowledged, authenticated, and armed. The rain intensified, transforming the trench into a foul river. The smell of wet metal mingled with sweat, blood, and something else. Fear, perhaps, though fear has no scent until desperation clings to it. Lightning flared again. Thunder followed, rolling over the landscape with a force that shook loose flecks of rust from the trench walls. We were thrust into our first combat rotation within hours. There was no preparation, no reassurances, no sense of purpose beyond survival. Alarms blared through the trench network, their tones rising in frantic intervals. Officers shouted orders through vox grills that crackled with static. Marek grabbed my arm, pulling me into formation. "Stay low," he hissed. "These trenches weren't dug for the living." As we scrambled to the firing step, the sky erupted with artillery fire. Shells screamed overhead, their trajectories carving bright arcs through the storm clouds. The ground convulsed with each detonation, mud splattering against my visor as fragments of debris rained down. A shell struck a nearby trench section, sending a plume of dirt and bodies skyward. When the remnants fell, the mud swallowed them without ceremony. "Return fire," an officer bellowed. I raised my lasgun, my hands trembling. Through the haze of smoke and rain, I glimpsed dark figures advancing across the blasted no-man's land. They moved with purpose, illuminated by the sporadic flashes of artillery fire. I squeezed the trigger. A crimson beam shot forward, lancing into the storm. Around me, lassfire lit the world in chaotic bursts. Penal Legionnaires fired wildly, their shots mingling with screams and the low hum of charging capacitors. The enemy's advance did not falter. Their silhouettes grew larger, more defined, as they approached the wire entanglements bordering our line. Someone to my left shouted for a medic before abruptly falling silent. I turned in time to see a body collapse into the trench beside me, face down in the mud, collar flickering with dying light. No one stopped to check if he still breathed. The war didn't pause for questions. The advancing figures neared the first line of defenses. When they breached the wire, the commissar barked an order into his vox. "Forward, fix bayonets and hold the Emperor's line." Marek grabbed my shoulder, pushing me forward. "Do not hesitate," he warned. "Hesitation is death." We vaulted from the trench, boots sinking into the mire. The world blurred into motion. Shouts, flashes, the metallic taste of ozone filling my lungs. The enemy rose before us like phantoms through the rain. Their armor glistened with mud and blood, their weapons raised. My bayonet met resistance. Not armor, not bone, but something softer and yet more unyielding. A spray of warmth splattered across my arm. I didn't look down. I didn't need to. The body fell away, and another shape lunged at me. Marek's lasgun barked, dropping it mid-stride. The collar pressed harder against my neck, as though the device monitored every spike of panic coursing through me. Each heartbeat felt like a countdown. The storm roared overhead, drowning out everything but the thunder of artillery and the gasps of dying men. Somewhere in the chaos, the commissar stood like an unshakable monument, his coat snapping in the storm wind. He fired his bolt pistol with measured precision, each shot obliterating its target. His presence was a reminder that fear had limits. Disobedience did not. Our line held, but barely. The enemy surged again and again, crashing against us like waves against a crumbling breakwall. Our numbers thinned. The mud deepened with the weight of blood. And still we fought, because the alternative was obliteration, either by the foe or by the collar around our throats. When the last of the enemy retreated into the smoke, Marek slumped against a shattered barricade. His breath came in ragged bursts. "Welcome to the Legion," he said with a bitter laugh. "If you thought the worst part of this life was the crimes that got you here, you were wrong." We returned to the trench under the watchful gaze of the commissar. He inspected us with quiet scrutiny. One man hesitated when ordered to police the corpses littering the ground. The commissar lifted his bolt pistol. The collar around the man's neck detonated. There was no scream, only a wet explosion of sound that blended into the storm. The commissar lowered his weapon calmly, as if swatting a fly. "This is your reminder," he said. "Failure is not permitted." Marek leaned toward me, voice hoarse. "He does that to encourage obedience." It worked. The hours after battle felt heavier than the chaos itself. We hauled bodies, ours and theirs, into mass graves hastily dug by servitors. The machines worked tirelessly, their limbs caked in mud, their vox units sputtering binary liturgies. The stench clung to everything. The rain could not wash it away. In the dimness of the trench, Marek handed me a tin cup of recaf. It tasted like ash and metal. "You fought well," he said. "That's rare for a fresh collar." "I didn't fight well," I replied. "I just didn't want to die." Marek smirked. "Same thing here." As the storm clouds began to thin, faint light filtered through the haze, casting long shadows across the ruin-strewn battlefield. The respite felt unnatural, as though the world itself paused only out of uncertainty. But I knew better. The war never paused. It only inhaled, preparing for the next breath. When night finally settled, the trench creaked with the weight of exhaustion. Men curled into corners, clutching their weapons like lifelines. The explosive collars gleamed faintly in the darkness, a constellation of doom wrapped around our throats. I lay awake, staring at the sky through the slats of broken trench cover. Stars shimmered far beyond reach, watching silently, indifferent to our suffering. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled again, low and hungry. The collar pulsed, a reminder, a warning, a promise. And as fatigue pulled at my eyelids, I realized that survival here was not about escaping death. It was about learning to live with it, pressed against your neck. Waiting. Always waiting. Would you like me to continue to Chapter 2? The cold settled over the trenches with a patience that felt almost deliberate, creeping into every crack of armor, every seam of cloth, every place a man believed himself fortified. It did not announce its coming with storms or frostbite, but with a quiet, persistent ache that began in the joints and burrowed deeper until it touched the marrow. I woke one morning unable to feel my fingers until I flexed them repeatedly, watching the knuckles glow pale in the weak light. The mud around me had stiffened into clotted ridges, as though the ground itself had grown tired of holding its own shape and simply froze mid-collapse. Even the air felt brittle, breaking against the lungs with each breath. Hunger arrived next. Not the immediate sharp kind that claws at the stomach, but the slow erosion that hollows the body from within. Our rations thinned with every passing cycle, the nutrient envelopes tasting more like damp paper than sustenance. The commissariat claimed supply lines were delayed by warp turbulence, that the Emperor rewarded endurance through adversity, that hunger was a test of faith. But the men knew better. Penal Legions were the lowest priority in any campaign. We existed to die quickly, not to eat well. Most of us learned to ignore the ache. We strapped our belts tighter, chewed on recalf grounds, even sucked the moisture from torn ration packs like starving animals. But hunger has a way of reshaping a man. Not all at once, but gradually, twisting his thoughts, sharpening his temper, blurring the lines between necessity and desperation. Arguments erupted over scraps. Fistfights turned bloody. More than once, a soldier woke to find his bunkmate rifling through pockets with frantic hands, searching for crumbs that weren't there. Through it all, Marek remained a steady presence. He seemed immune to the hunger's worst impulses, though his cheekbones grew sharper and his eyes sank deeper with each passing day. One night, as we sat near a flickering lumen, he spoke without lifting his gaze. "The cold and the hunger will take more of us than the enemy ever will," he said. "Remember that. A starving man turns on anything that breathes. A freezing man forgets he's alive. That's when the collars stop being threats and start becoming mercy." His words lingered with me, like the quiet rasp of the wind as it moved through the trench walls. I understood him, even if I didn't want to. Dying in battle at least offered the illusion of purpose, but dying slowly in the mud felt like being erased, bit by bit, until the body simply surrendered. It wasn't long before the first disappearances began. At first, they were small enough to dismiss. A soldier assigned to sentry duty failed to return after his shift ended. Marek suggested he might have deserted, though the idea felt absurd. A deserter in a penal legion didn't flee. He was hunted. The collars ensured that. Yet his absence went unacknowledged by both officers and commissars. No search party formed. No Vox alerts sounded. He was simply gone, swallowed by the trench network like breath lost in winter wind. 2 days later, another vanished, this time from inside the trench, while surrounded by his squad mates. They claimed they saw him hunched beneath a makeshift lean-to, warming his hands near a ration heater. Then the heater flickered, sputtered, and extinguished. When the lumens steadied again, the man had vanished. No footprints marked the mud. No struggle had disturbed the ground. It was as though he had simply ceased to be. The commissar declared them deserters, reinforcing his decree by publicly executing 3 men whose collars had already begun blinking in warning over minor infractions. "Let this be known," he said, his voice sharp as the crack of a lasbolt. "Desertion is treason, and treason earns no graves." But fear spread faster than his proclamations. Men whispered in the dark, speaking of creatures that moved beneath the mud, of phantom figures walking through the trenches at night, of silent footsteps pacing along the ridges where no man dared walk after dusk. Some claimed to hear breathing behind them when they stood alone. Others swore they felt hands tugging at their ankles when they tried to sleep. Superstition grew like mold. One evening, as the sun bled across the sky in muted red streaks, I found myself guarding a rickety section of trench near the comm lines. The air was still. Too still. No artillery thundered in the distance. No echoing footsteps approached. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I leaned against the wooden support beams, rubbing warmth into my hands, listening to the faint hum of a nearby Vox relay. Then I heard it. A scrape. Soft. Close. I turned sharply, lasgun raised. The trench behind me was empty. The shadows cast by the fading light were long, but nothing moved. I exhaled slowly, lowering my weapon. The scrape came again. Closer. I aimed toward the sound, my finger tightening on the trigger. A third scrape broke the silence, this time accompanied by a faint, wet rustle, like a creature dragging itself through narrow spaces. "Who's there?" I called, though the wind stole the strength of my voice. Silence. I took a step forward, boots crunching through stiff mud. The sound came once more, but shifted direction, echoing through the wooden walls as if the trench itself whispered back. My heart thudded against my ribs. Each pulse reverberated through the explosive collar. I backed away slowly, returning to the comm lines only when Marek's silhouette appeared over the trench lip. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, dropping into the mud beside me. "Something's moving," I replied. "Under us, through the walls. I heard it." He studied the beams, pressing his hand against one. For a moment, the trench seemed to exhale around us, the air shifting subtly. Marek's expression tightened. "You're not wrong," he murmured. "Others have heard it too. Why hasn't the commissar said anything? Because if the men knew something was stalking them from below, they'd panic, and panic in a penal legion spreads faster than lass fire." The scraping resumed, so faint that it could have been imagination. But the way Marek stiffened told me it wasn't. "We move," he said. "This part of the trench isn't safe." We reported the disturbance to the officers. They dismissed it as vermin, though none of us believed them. Vermin didn't pull men into the earth without leaving a trace. Vermin didn't move with such deliberate intent. The cold deepened, the hunger sharpened, and the disappearances continued. It became increasingly common to wake and find an empty bunk where a man had slept only hours before. Some men vanished while relieving themselves at the trench edge, others while patrolling the perimeter wire. In one case, a squad of 5 failed to return from a scavenging run. Their tracks led into a shallow ravine and ended abruptly, as though they'd stepped off the world. Marek spoke less with each passing day. His eyes took on a distant sheen, reflecting more fear than fatigue. I often caught him tracing the tally marks on his collar, adding another each time he survived a battle. But lately his hand hovered above the metal, hesitant, as if unsure whether survival meant anything anymore. One night, while the trench slumbered in uneasy silence, a scream pierced the darkness. It wasn't the sharp cry of a man struck by las fire, nor the agonized howl of someone caught in a shrapnel blast. This scream was gurgling, wet, choked, like a man trying to shout while sinking into quicksand. Marek and I bolted from our bunks, lasguns raised. We sprinted toward the source of the scream, our boots tearing through soggy earth. By the time we reached the junction trench, the screaming had ceased. The men nearby pointed shakily toward a collapsed section of the floorboards. A crater-like depression formed in the mud, water seeping into it like a slow, ominous wound. "He was standing right here," someone whispered. Then the ground opened. We knelt at the edge of the collapse. Deep gouges marred the wooden supports, long, vertical cuts spaced like fingers or claws. The earth beneath had shifted unnaturally, twisted into a burrow-like cavity that disappeared into blackness. "Something pulled him under," Marek said quietly. His voice held no doubt. The commissar arrived moments later, flanked by 2 officers. He surveyed the scene with detached scrutiny. Without hesitation, he ordered the entire area reinforced and forbade discussion of the incident. But ignoring terror does not erase it. That night, the trench murmured with fear. Men slept clutching their weapons. Some refused to close their eyes. Others muttered prayers under their breath, invoking the Emperor's mercy, begging for deliverance from creatures they couldn't name. In the darkness. I lay awake listening to the cold creep along the trench walls, listening for the telltale scrape that signaled the shifting of whatever hunted beneath. It came. Faint, rhythmic, deliberate, moving along the wood, growing nearer. I held my breath, gripping my lasgun until my knuckles ached. The scraping stopped directly beneath me. For a moment, the trench seemed to pulse, as if the earth inhaled. Something shifted in the mud, slowly, deliberately. Then, as quickly as it began, the sound faded, retreating down the length of the trench. Sleep eluded me until dawn. When the first light broke through, Marek approached with hollow eyes. "It's getting bolder," he said, "whatever it is. And the worst part? The men are starving for something to blame. If this continues, we'll turn on each other before the enemy fires another shot." He wasn't wrong. The cold carved cracks in morale. The hunger deepened them. Fear widened them further until trust became a rare, fragile thing. Fights erupted over ration shares. Men accused one another of sabotage. A soldier was nearly executed when another claimed he'd seen him dragging a comrade toward a collapsed section of trench, though the commissar spared him only because the accusation lacked bodies to support it. The trench became a crucible, a place where the weak broke, the strong hardened, and everyone else dissolved into the mud like forgotten bones. One frigid evening, as Marek and I patrolled the perimeter wire, he spoke without turning. "You asked once why I carve marks into my collar." I nodded, adjusting my grip on the lasgun. "To record what you've survived. And to remember what it cost," he said quietly. "Each mark isn't a victory. It's a reminder that I lived while others didn't, that every day I survive, someone else disappears into the cold or the earth or the jaws of whatever stalks us." He paused, staring into the fog. "Survival here isn't a blessing," he said. "It's a debt, and one day the Emperor, or whatever lies beneath our feet, comes to collect." Before I could respond, a distant roar echoed across the battlefield. Artillery, heavy, relentless, approaching. The ground quivered beneath the barrage. Marek stiffened. "Another offensive, another chance for this place to bury us." We raced back to the trench as alarms blared through the comm lines. Officers shouted orders. The commissar strode along the firing step, barking commands with icy precision. Men scrambled to weapons positions, their faces drawn and pale. As the shells screamed overhead, tearing apart the already fractured sky, I felt a tremor ripple through the ground beneath my boots. Not from the artillery, something deeper, more alive. The mud bulged. A faint scrape echoed through the trench walls. Marek met my gaze. "It's coming," he said. And for the first time since I joined the Penal Legion, I didn't know whether he meant the enemy or something far worse, waiting beneath the cold and hunger to claim us. The artillery did not relent that night. It carved the sky into roaring fractures of light, each explosion tearing open the darkness as though the world itself were cracking under the strain of its own suffering. The ground shuddered with every impact, rattling the trench planks and sending showers of dirt raining down like a relentless, gritty storm. Men clung to their weapons, knuckles white beneath the grime, eyes wide with the sick understanding that another push, another brutal surge from the enemy, would sweep across our line and bury us before dawn. Yet amid the chaos, a different tremor slithered through the earth, subtle but deliberate, as though something beneath the mud awoke at the sound of destruction, eager to rise and feed. Marek grabbed my arm as the alarms blared. "Formation!" he shouted over the rumbling ground. "Get to formation now!" The commissar's voice followed moments later, slicing through the noise with cold authority. He moved along the parapet like a dark omen, coat whipping in the wind, bolt pistol drawn, explosive collar activator glinting in one hand as if eager for use. His gaze passed over each of us with calculated distance, ensuring fear kept us upright where courage had long begun to erode. The first wave broke against our defenses just as the artillery eased, silhouettes emerging from smoke and dust like wraiths from a shattered world. Lasfire lit the trench in erratic bursts, red streaks illuminating mud-spattered faces as enemy troops advanced with grim determination. The crack of their rifles blended with the heavy thud of boots in the mire. I fired blindly into the fog, each shot a reflexive act of survival rather than precision. The recoil vibrated through numb fingers, and the lasgun's capacitor hummed like a strained heartbeat. Bodies fell. Screams rose. The trench walls shook as if they too recoiled from the brutality. Men stumbled backward, slipping on blood-slick planks, only to be shoved forward again by commissarial threats barked through the din. Marek kept me near him, guiding my shots when visibility failed, pulling me behind cover when the enemy volleys intensified. Yet even as the battle raged above, the scraping beneath the boards returned. Slow, dragging movements that moved in sync with the quake of artillery. Something else fought through the ground beneath us. It wanted the dead. It wanted the dying. It wanted us. When the first wave finally broke apart, collapsing into disorganized retreat, the commissar raised his bolt pistol and fired a blast into the air. The sound silenced us more effectively than any command could have. Ash drifted down in delicate spirals. The rain paused as though the world awaited his decree. "Hold your positions!" he shouted. "Second wave incoming!" But before he could finish the sentence, a long, low groan vibrated through the trench floor. For a heart-stopping moment, the boards bulged upward, swelling like lungs drawing a breath. Men staggered back, eyes wide with primal terror. The commissar's expression hardened, though even he could not mask the flicker of unease that crossed his face. A beam snapped. Mud cracked. Something beneath the trench dragged itself closer, shifting the earth with grotesque purpose. But the ground stilled before revealing its form. Instead, the boards sagged back into place, as if the thing below reconsidered. For now. The commissar turned sharply toward Marek and me. "You too," he ordered, voice simmering with irritation. "With me." Marek tensed but obeyed, pushing past the exhausted soldiers as we followed the commissar through a series of narrow trenches and side corridors. The air grew colder the deeper we went, the ground firmer, the noises of battle fading into a dull, distant thunder. The trench walls narrowed until the sky became a thin strip of gray above us, flickering with the sporadic glow of distant explosions. We stopped near a rusted command dugout, where two officers hovered over a data slate displaying topographic scans of the battlefield. The graphics flickered from static interference, warping the terrain into jagged distortions. One officer stepped aside. "Show them," he muttered. The commissar tapped the slate. The image zoomed in on the area beneath our trench network, an intricate pattern of tunnels, some natural, many definitely not. Several pulsed faintly, as though the scanner recognized movement. "Tell me," the commissar said slowly, "why the Emperor sees fit to saddle me with a Penal Legion positioned directly above a nest of whatever this is." Marek studied the image with grim focus. "We've heard it moving," he said. "Men disappearing through the earth. Something's hunting down there." "Do you think I am unaware?" the commissar snapped. "Do you think I haven't lost soldiers to this?" He paused, folding his hands behind his back. "But the solution is not to panic. It is to deploy resources where they matter." He pointed to the deepest tunnel on the scan. "This is where the readings spike. Something has formed a chamber here, a nest, a den." His lip curled. "A hunger." A knot tightened in my stomach. "You want us to go down there?" The commissar's eyes locked onto mine, cold yet gleaming with something dangerously close to expectation. "You are Penal Legion. Your purpose is not to survive. It is to be useful." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Marek and I could hear. "And if you succeed, I will authorize removal of your collars." For a moment, the world went silent. Even the distant artillery seemed to pause. Freedom, that impossible word cut through the mud, blood, and terror like a shard of light. No Penal Legion soldier ever heard it without suspicion. But the commissar's expression remained unreadable, his authority undeniable. Marek stared at him as though uncertain whether he should spit or laugh. "They don't remove collars," Marek said quietly. "Not ever." The commissar's tone sharpened. "I have that authority, and I intend to use it for the Emperor's benefit, but only if you do as ordered." Another officer stepped forward. "We've tried deploying servitors, but they malfunction near the tunnels. Auspec's readings fail. Vox signals distort. The men hear things, see things. Some went mad before the creatures even touched them." Creatures. More than one. My pulse quickened. The collar hummed faintly, responding to the tension crawling through my veins. "What exactly are we facing?" Marek asked. The officers exchanged glances. The commissar answered. "We don't know." The words hung in the cold air like a sentence. "But," he continued, "we know this. The enemy is preparing an offensive that will tear through our lines. If we cannot stabilize the ground beneath us, the trenches will collapse. Thousands will die. A breach in this sector will cost the Imperium far more than 2 convicts." His voice hardened further. "So you will enter those tunnels. You will discover the source. You will destroy it, disable it, or report back before it consumes more of my men." "And if we refuse?" Marek asked, though we all knew the answer. "Your collars will detonate before the thought finishes forming." Silence stretched between us, suffocating in its finality. Freedom or death. A choice that wasn't one at all. We accepted the task because refusing wasn't survival, it was suicide. The commissar led us to a small supply alcove where we were equipped with Auspex units calibrated to detect subterranean movement, reinforced boots, additional power cells, and short-blade bayonets with teeth designed to cut through bone. A tech priest approached us with a solemn rasp of binary prayer, affixing a luminescent purity seal to each of our lasguns. His mechadendrites clicked nervously as he murmured, "May the Omnissiah preserve what little remains of your function." Marek muttered, "Encouraging." The entrance to the tunnel lay at the far edge of the trench line, an opening torn by the collapse earlier, widened now by engineers who worked in pallid silence. The air billowing from the hole was warm and damp, carrying a stench that made my eyes water. It smelled like rot and wet stone and something else, something alive. Merrick spoke softly as we descended. "Keep your breathing steady. Fear eats faster when you breathe too hard." I wanted to laugh at the simplicity of it, but the moment my boots touched the sloping earth and the faint sound of dripping echoed from the darkness ahead, I realized he was right. Fear did not scream down here. It whispered, it crawled, it sharpened itself on every nerve. The tunnel walls pulsed faintly beneath the glow of our lamps, as though veins ran beneath the surface. Occasionally, the ground trembled, sending dust drifting from the ceiling like falling ash. Marek swept the auspex, from side to side. The device emitted small chirps, occasionally rising in pitch before settling back into steady rhythm. We walked for what felt like an hour, maybe more. Time bent in the dark. The tunnel twisted, narrowing and widening unpredictably. At one point, we passed a cluster of bones half buried in mud, shards of uniform still clinging to them. Penal Legion. The collar was intact, blinking weakly as though searching for a pulse long extinguished. "Don't look too long," Marek said. "Down here, the dead stare back." We pressed onward. The tunnel widened suddenly, opening into a vast chamber that stole my breath. The ceiling arched high above, woven from interlocking strands of something not quite stone, not quite flesh. The air throbbed with faint vibrations, like the echo of a giant heartbeat. In the center lay an excavation of sorts, mounds of earth piled around a pit descending deeper than the light of our lamps could reach. And around the pit, bodies. Dozens. Some whole, some torn apart, arranged with disturbing precision. They formed rings around the pit's edge, heads angled downward as though bowing to whatever lay beneath. Every collar still blinked faintly, creating a halo of sickly lights. Marek whispered, "Emperor, protect us." A scrape echoed from the depths of the pit, soft at first, then sharper, then louder. Movement. Rising. The tunnel behind us trembled. The chamber's air thickened. And in that moment, I understood the true nature of the commissar's bargain. He hadn't sent us down to destroy something. He had sent us down to wake it. The scrape grew into a rhythmic climbing sound. The pit exhaled warm, fetid air. Marek positioned his lasgun, voice trembling for the first time since I'd met him. "Whatever comes out of there, don't look away. Don't lose sight of it. If you do, you're already dead." The darkness below shifted, and something vast began to climb. The thing that climbed from the pit did not emerge all at once. It came in fragments. First a shifting shadow that writhed against the stone-like walls, then a sound like wet cloth being dragged over bone. Then a faint shimmer of something reflecting our lamps with an oily gleam. The air thickened with a pressure that felt almost psychic, though Marek insisted later it was merely fear squeezing the lungs tight. But fear alone could not explain the strange warmth that radiated from the chamber walls, or the faint glimmer that flickered in the darkness like dying embers. Whatever lay beneath us, whatever rose through that pit, was not merely a creature. It was an intrusion, a wrongness given shape. As we aimed our lasguns toward the trembling edge, a low groan rolled through the chamber. Deep, resonant, vibrating in a way that made my collar pulse against my skin. Dust fell from the ceiling. The pile of corpses around the rim shifted almost imperceptibly, as though bracing for something long awaited. Marek steadied his weapon, though I saw the tremor in his knuckles. When the creature finally breached the pit's mouth, The lights faltered. They didn't flicker. They dimmed with intent, shrinking back as if recoiling from the form rising before them. What emerged did not resemble any fauna native to the planet, nor any warp beast I had ever heard whispered about by trembling soldiers in freezing trenches. Its form warped with every shift of our lamps, as though caught between being seen and refusing visibility. One moment it appeared serpentine, elongated and slick with mucus sheen. The next, bulky and chitinous, like an immense insect forced into the shape of a corpse. But its eyes, if the two pale orbs were indeed eyes, held steady. They glowed with muted luminescence, like coals that had once burned bright and were now buried beneath ash. I felt Marek stiffen beside me. "Aim for the head," he whispered, "if it has one." But the creature did not advance. Instead, it froze halfway out of the pit, its body constricted in unnatural tension. A tremor rippled through it, and in that moment I heard something impossible, a faint, wavering hum that sounded disturbingly like a voice. Not a human voice, not speech, a resonance, a murmur. Then, from somewhere deeper below, a soft, golden glow rose upward, so faint I thought my eyes deceived me. The creature recoiled violently, the glow brightened, and for a heartbeat, no longer, a silhouette appeared behind the creature, standing in the darkness of the pit. Tall, shrouded, radiant in a way that defied the chamber's gloom. For that brief instant, the silhouette resembled the form of a warrior, broad-shouldered, bearing a posture of unyielding vigilance. It resembled the storied protectors of Holy Terra, whose golden armor was said to shine across the very halls of the imperial palace. But the vision flickered like a dying lumen strip, and dissolved the moment the creature twisted and slammed its weight upward, shaking dirt into our faces. Marek cursed under his breath. "What did you see?" I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I trusted my own memory enough to speak it into existence. The creature surged forward. We fired. Lasfire lit the chamber in wild, frantic bursts. Beams carved glowing streaks across the creature's shifting frame. Some shots sank into yielding flesh, others sparked off hardened plates, as though striking armor. The thing roared, or perhaps the ground roared beneath it, because the sound did not originate from any visible mouth. It was a shriek that radiated from the walls themselves, vibrating through our bones with nauseating force. The corpses around the pit collapsed inward, as though dragged by invisible gravity. "Fall back!" Marek shouted, but the tunnel behind us had already begun to collapse. The walls contracted subtly, narrowing as though dragged inward by unseen hands. The faint glow at the far end dimmed until darkness swallowed it whole. The creature's bulk scraped against the chamber walls, shedding translucent fragments that dissolved into the air like smoke. Then something extraordinary happened. A streak of golden light tore across the chamber, slicing through the thick gloom. It wasn't bright. It didn't even illuminate the walls. But it cut like memory, sharp and undeniable. The creature recoiled, slamming into the far wall with a guttural convulsion. Its pale eyes dimmed. Marek froze. "Emperor's mercy," he whispered. "Again." I didn't ask if he saw it. The awe in his voice told me enough. The golden streak faded into nothing. The creature lay momentarily stunned, its body shuddering in unnatural patterns, swelling and collapsing as if wrestling unseen constraints. Marek seized the moment. "We move now!" We sprinted along the chamber's edge, keeping distance between ourselves and the writhing mass. The floor trembled beneath our boots. Each step felt like running across the skin of something still alive, something trying desperately to wake. The auspex in Marek's hand emitted rapid chirps, erratic, panicked, useless. The internal logic had given up trying to classify what surrounded us. We slipped into a narrow crevice along the far wall, squeezing through jagged stone and pulsing tendrils that felt warm to the touch. The noise of the creature's struggle faded behind us, muffled by layers of earth. But as we crawled deeper into the passage, the golden glow flickered again, this time above us, faint but persistent, like a distant beacon fighting through layers of rock. "What is that?" Marek whispered, voice trembling despite his effort to remain composed. "A reflection? A flare? Something in the lamps?" "No," I said. "It's none of those." A moment passed. Then Marek spoke again, quieter than before. "Is it him?" The question drifted through the tunnel like incense smoke, fragile, trembling, hopeful in a way that bordered on fear. Men spoke of the Emperor often, but rarely in whispers, rarely with uncertainty. Faith had rules, boundaries, expectations. This glow did not abide by those rules. It felt intimate, directed, fragile, as though it searched more than it commanded. "We don't know what it is," I said, though some part of me, buried under layers of disbelief and exhaustion, wanted desperately to believe otherwise. We reached the tunnel's end and emerged into a smaller chamber shaped irregularly, as if carved by desperate hands instead of nature. From its center rose a pillar of stone with deep grooves spiraling towards the ceiling. Embedded within one groove lay a metallic object, half buried, half exposed, gleaming faintly in the dim light. Marek approached cautiously. "Is that Imperial?" It was. A broken Aquila emblem, warped and twisted but unmistakable. The wings were chipped, the central skull cracked. Yet despite its damage, it seemed to pulse with warmth, as though absorbing the golden light that filtered through the chamber. "Was this left here?" I asked aloud. "Or did it grow here?" Marek didn't answer. Before we could examine it further, the chamber trembled. A shock wave rippled through the floor, forcing us to brace against the walls. Dust filled the air. Somewhere behind us, a deep roar echoed through the tunnels. "The creature's moving," Marek said, "and it's not alone." The auspex beeped frantically. Multiple signals, too many to count. Creatures emerging from the pit, climbing, searching. The chamber pulsed with warm light again, stronger this time. It seeped from cracks in the ceiling, illuminating the broken Aquila as though igniting it from within. The emblem vibrated faintly under Marek's touch. "It's reacting," he murmured. "To us? To them? Or to something far away?" A warmth spread through the chamber, brushing against my collar like the faint touch of fingertips. For a moment, the oppressive weight of the earth lessened. The cold retreated. The hunger gnawing at my stomach dulled into manageable ache. Just for a moment. Then the warmth vanished. The golden glow flickered. And the creatures found us. Their scraping crawled along the tunnel walls like claws dragging across bone. Dozens of pale eyes reflected faint light as they surged forward, limbs twisting unnaturally as they pulled themselves toward the chamber. "We hold here," Marek said, though fear trembled under his words. "No," I answered. "We run. We find another way out." "There is no other way." The creatures poured into the chamber mouth. Lasfire erupted around us. Beams carved into the creature's flesh, but they did not slow. They twisted with impossible angles, absorbing shots as though pain were foreign to them. One lunged, jaws gaping. Marek struck it with his bayonet, driving it back only a step. Then the golden glow pulsed again. Stronger. Brighter. A silhouette appeared at the chamber. Entrance. Tall, radiant, indistinct. Arms raised. Light blooming from its form like a silent explosion. The creatures recoiled violently. Some collapsed outright. Others fled, scrambling back into the tunnels with shrieks that vibrated through my bones. Marek fell to his knees. I could not breathe. The silhouette flickered, fading, strengthening, wavering like a flame caught between wind and will. It lifted a hand towards the Aquila. The broken emblem glowed fiercely, then shattered into dust. The silhouette vanished, the chamber dimmed, the creatures were gone, and the tunnels fell silent. Marek trembled as he rose. "What was that?" "Rumor," I whispered. "Faith. Imagination." He shook his head. "No, that was something real. Or something that wants us to think it's real." He turned sharply toward me. "Do you deny what we saw?" I closed my eyes, recalling the figure, the gold, the posture, the impossible serenity. I could not deny it, but I dared not name it. "We need to leave," I said, "before the creatures regroup." Marek nodded reluctantly. We followed a narrow fissure leading away from the chamber. The golden glow never returned. The tunnels grew darker, colder, eerily quiet. When we finally saw daylight filtering through a crack above us, I felt a relief so profound it bordered on grief. We climbed back into the trench line just as dawn broke across the blasted horizon. Soldiers stared at us in disbelief. The commissar approached slowly, inspecting our torn uniforms, our blood-smeared faces, our trembling hands. "You survived," he said simply. Marek nodded. "We found a nest, but there's more beneath, many more." "And the source?" I hesitated. Marek spoke first. "We saw something." The commissar's gaze sharpened. "Define something." Marek faltered. His eyes flicked toward me. I answered for him. "A presence," I said. "A light. A vision." The commissar's expression did not change, yet the air grew colder around him. "Visions," he repeated. "Delusions brought on by starvation and proximity to warp anomalies." He stepped closer. "You will not speak of these visions again. Do you understand?" We nodded. But as the commissar walked away, Marek whispered, "He knows." I didn't need to ask what he meant. The commissar's silence was not disbelief. It was fear. And fear in a man like him meant only one thing. Whatever we had awakened below the earth, whatever light had answered it, would not stay buried for long. The dawn that rose over the trenches did not feel like morning. It felt like an aftershock, an echo of something deeper, heavier, and more final that still trembled through the earth beneath our boots. The pale sunlight crawled reluctantly over the crater fields, painting the mud in sickly shades of brown and gray. Smoke drifted over the horizon in slow-moving curtains, turning the sky into a haze of ash where the sun's weak glow struggled to break through. Men stirred with the dullness of those who had slept too close to fear. They blinked into the cold, flexed, frost-stiff joints and looked at one another with hollow eyes that asked a single unspoken question. Why are we still alive? I felt it too, that unsettling, lingering sense that survival was no longer a victory, but an extension of something unresolved, something waiting to reach its conclusion. Marek sat beside me on a splintered support beam, his lasgun balanced across his knees. His breath misted in the air, though the morning was not cold enough to justify the thickness of that vapor. He stared at the horizon without blinking. "You didn't sleep," I said. He didn't deny it. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it breathing. The pit, the thing below, the light. His voice faltered. All of it. I didn't tell him I had experienced the same thing. When the last remnants of night had crept across the trench, I'd felt a pulse beneath the earth. Slow, faint, familiar. The echo of the creature that should have died. The echo of the golden silhouette that had vanished. the echo of something both terrifying and strangely protective. They lingered in my dreams like overlapping shadows, each one growing sharper as the morning approached. The rest of Squad Cinder was scattered along the firing steps, some tending to their weapons, others chewing on flavorless ration bars that did little to blunt the ache in their stomachs. A few whispered among themselves, leaning close to avoid the commissar's gaze. The rumors had already begun to spread, about the creatures beneath the trenches, about the light that had appeared in the tunnels, about the forces at war beneath the world's surface, just as viciously as those fighting above it. But the commissar silenced all whispers with a single proclamation delivered at dawn. He marched along the trench, coat snapping like a banner in the bitter wind, and delivered the words that froze the breath of every soldier who heard them. Prepare for final advance. No one moved. No one breathed. A final advance in a Penal Legion meant exactly one thing. We were being sent to die. Marek straightened. The men around him did as well, though none concealed the dread that washed across their faces. The commissar climbed onto a platform of sandbags and rusted plasteel, turning to address the entire line. His voice carried across the trenches like a blade drawn across stone. Enemy forces have breached the eastern sector. The line is collapsing. Command has issued a directive: no retreat, no repositioning, no surrender. This legion will advance upon the fortified enemy position at Ridgepoint Delta and hold it until reinforcements arrive. You will move swiftly, without hesitation, and without deviation. He paused, surveying the condemned souls before him. You will die with purpose, he continued. That is more than your crimes ever earned. His words were not cruel. They were simple truth. A murmur rippled through the soldiers. Some clenched their weapons tighter. Others whispered prayers beneath their breath. A few stared blankly, as though trying to comprehend the inevitability of what awaited them. The commissar stepped forward and lifted the activator for our collars high enough for all to see. Should any of you attempt to retreat, he said calmly, I will purge the line myself. Marek leaned close to me as the commissar moved on. He's not bluffing. I've seen it done. What about the tunnels? I whispered. The creatures. They won't matter when the shells start falling again, Marek replied. We're going above ground this time. Whatever is beneath us, it will decide its own moment. I wasn't sure whether that was comforting or horrifying. We assembled at the trench lip as the sky rumbled with distant engine noise. Enemy aircraft streaked across the horizon like black arrows, dropping trails of smoke behind them. Heavy artillery launched volleys that shook the ground beneath our boots. Officers shouted commands through Vox units crackling with interference. The atmosphere shifted from dread to grim anticipation. A siren wailed overhead, then another, then the final call. The commissar raised his sword. Advance! We surged over the trench like a tide of ragged ghosts. The mud swallowed our boots with wet sucking sounds as we charged across no man's land. Lasfire streaked through the air in bright crimson arcs. The wind tore at our clothes. Explosions erupted around us, flinging mud, debris, and bodies in all directions. Marek ran beside me, breathing heavily, his eyes fixed forward. Keep low, he barked. Zigzag, don't run straight, and for the Emperor's sake, don't look back. The battlefield unfolded in a storm of chaos. Enemy fortifications loomed ahead, bunkers half buried in rubble, machine gun nests spitting fire, trenches swarming with defenders. Shells detonated in great plumes of dirt and flame. Strafing runs carved lines of death across the ground. Men fell. One staggered forward without legs. Another collapsed with his collar blinking erratically. A third dropped silently. No wound visible, simply sinking into the mud like his life had been switched off. I focused on moving, breathing, surviving. The ground trembled beneath us again, not from artillery this time. A deep vibration rippled through the soil, traveling in waves that knocked men off their feet. Marek shouted, "It's the tunnels!" A section of the ground behind us collapsed in a violent implosion, swallowing a dozen soldiers into a cavernous void. Screams erupted from the pit. Something moved inside it, something pale, writhing, swarming. Creatures burst forth, not just one, not a handful, dozens. They scrambled out of the pit with horrifying speed, limbs contorting, bodies shifting with agonizing elasticity. Their pale eyes glowed faintly, even in daylight. They swarmed toward the nearest soldiers like a living tide. The commissar saw them. For a moment, fear flickered across his face, the first crack in his unshakable composure. But then he raised his bolt pistol and fired into the mass, each shot obliterating a creature in explosive bursts. "Forward!" he roared. "Ignore them. The enemy line is your objective." But the men could not ignore them. The creatures were too fast, too numerous. They tore through ranks with claws and teeth and impossible limbs that extended farther than any natural anatomy allowed. Soldiers screamed as they were dragged into the mud, their collars blinking violently as the activators searched for pulse signals that could no longer be found. I fired until my laser gun overheated. The creatures did not fall easily. Some absorbed shots like sponges. Others twisted away from beams with supernatural agility. The battlefield devolved into a war on two fronts, one human, one aberrant. Then the sky changed. A golden shimmer rippled across the clouds, so faint I thought it was a reflection of sunlight through smoke. But Marek saw it too. He stopped firing. His voice trembled. "It's back." The shimmer grew stronger, brightening into a diffuse glow that spread across the entire horizon. It wasn't sunlight. It wasn't fire. It was something else, something neither natural nor wholly comprehensible. It radiated an energy that felt warm, familiar, and impossible. The creatures convulsed, every one of them. Their pale eyes flickered, their limbs spasmed. Screeches erupted across the battlefield, not cries of aggression, but of pain. They writhed as though scorched by the golden light. And then, a silhouette appeared again. Tall, unmoving, radiant. It stood at the edge of the battlefield, half obscured by smoke, yet unmistakably present. Its form flickered like a mirage, shifting between clarity and distortion. It bore no weapon, yet its presence alone sent waves of tremors through the earth. Marek fell to his knees. "Emperor, Emperor, if that is you." He wasn't praying. He was pleading. But the silhouette did not advance. It watched. The creatures recoiled from it, hissing, retreating toward the pits from which they had emerged. Some dissolved into the earth. Others scattered across the field like insects fleeing fire. The commissar saw the figure too. He stared, transfixed, lips parted, hand trembling. For one heartbeat, the battlefield froze. Then the silhouette flickered and vanished. The golden shimmer dimmed. The sky dulled. The world resumed its chaos. But something had changed. The creatures no longer surged toward us. They fled, scrambling into sinkholes that opened beneath them. The tunnels collapsed behind them, sealing their escape. Their shrieks faded into muffled echoes as the earth swallowed them, and we were left with the human enemy. Their guns roared anew, lasfire and bullets tore through the air. "Advance!" the commissar cried, regaining composure. "Now! Press the line!" Marek rose to his feet, steadying himself. "That was not imagination," he said breathlessly. "That was real. It has to mean something." But I could not answer, because the figure had not looked at the creatures. It had looked at us, as though measuring us, as though judging. The battle raged for what felt like hours. We breached the enemy line in a storm of mud, blood, and shouting. The bunkers fell, the trenches collapsed. Soldiers fought desperately with bayonets, knives, even bare hands. The commissar led from the front, a vision of savage determination. Marek fought like a man unbound, as though the golden vision had infused him with the strength of 10. When the smoke cleared, Ridgepoint Delta was ours. Men collapsed from exhaustion. Some wept, some stared blankly at the sky. Marek sat beside me, breathing heavily, his uniform torn and bloodied. "We survived," he said, almost in disbelief. "For now," I replied. Because survival in a penal legion was temporary. A delay, not a deliverance. But something else had happened that day, something deeper, stranger, more profound than mere victory. The golden figure had appeared. It had intervened. It had chosen its moment. And while the commissar forbade all mention of visions, all whisper of light, all memory of the silhouette, he could not stop the truth from spreading. Even he could not stop himself from glancing at the horizon long after the battle, searching for a glow he would never admit he believed in. Night fell over the battlefield. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of ash and churned blood. The earth beneath us quieted, no longer trembling with the movement of creatures. But I knew, deep in the marrow of my battered bones, that this was not the end. We had seen the echo of something greater, something watching, something choosing its moment to intervene, or to abandon. The last march of the condemned was not over, because the condemned were still breathing, still thinking, still questioning, and in the grim darkness of the far future, nothing is more dangerous than a man who has begun to wonder why he still lives.